Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name's Diane Sears, and I want to welcome you to our webinar. This is our, I believe, 7th webinar in our series since the COVID lockdown started. We are Go for the Greens, and I want to introduce my co-founder, Cindy Chase. Cindy, why don't you say hello?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you from my former employee, UPS. This is our 7th webinar, and for those of you that don't know, we also do webinars for mentorship programs, which are also on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. You can find that out on our website, and would appreciate it if you would share it. If any of you have any children that are the ages from sophomore in high school to seniors in college, we welcome them to keep learning about life and about opportunities during this virtual time. So wanted to give a plug for the mentorship program. The other thing I want to thank Diane, who's been doing an exceptional job being the moderator of these programs. If you haven't had the opportunity, you can check them out on YouTube. You just go to Go for the Greens, www.goforthegreens webinar, and you can see them on YouTube because we've had quite a few other webinars if you have not had the opportunity to look at them. The other thing I'd like to say is that right now, while we're going through this, I guess, COVID-19 pandemic situation, Go for the Greens, our annual event is scheduled for September 24th through the 26th. And right now we are still moving forward. We know that a lot of our partner organizations have not been able to hold an event, but Diane and myself have been having conversations with Disney, and right now we're still looking forward to do something. It might look like a hybrid conference, meaning for those of the people that can actually attend in person and feel safe about the travel. Number one is safety. If you feel that you can attend, just keep looking at our website. You're going to see a lot of marketing information, but right now that is still scheduled for September 24th to the 26th, 2020. Willing and everything happening in the right way. So Diane, thank you for the few moments. Sorry I went over allowed. I'm 2 minutes over allowed, but this is going to be a great presentation. Love to see my partners at UPS. Go Brown. And I'm going to put myself out, and I will see you all at the end of the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Okay, so for those of you who are new for us, Go for the Greens is built on 4 pillars. All green pillars. One is green as far as business growth. We're going to talk a lot about that today, about the growth of your business. The second pillar is all about sustainability. We know that's really important to our corporate partners, and so we are always preparing our women business owners to be more sustainable in their businesses and be able to explain what that means. The third pillar is about golf. So we teach women business owners how to play golf and use golf as a business tool in business, because the men have been doing it for so long. And the fourth pillar is kind of new for us, newer, and that is to train some of our green sisters, the young women who are coming up as future leaders of tomorrow, the college and high school kids who are learning about careers. So that's what we're all about, and we thank you for being with us today. With that, I want to introduce our sponsor, one of our sponsors, and that is Layla Eagle. And Layla, if you can tell us a little bit about what you are and what you've been doing with us with the Matchmaker program, that would be really helpful.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Like Maria said, it's really nice to see your smiling faces, and I look forward to someday being able to see you physically, not just virtually. So we have been working, we're busy working this week on some virtual matchmakers for you. And I have provided you there with a website so that you can go and fill out your business profile. And what we're doing is just like you've done before, your face-to-face matchmaking with diversity professionals, procurement folks, so that you can engage with your products. We're doing that virtually, so we're providing you with a platform to create your business profile, even add a video of your services, and then we have events, the professional procurement and supply diversity people there. You can request to meet with them and have a video call with them, based on, of course, on their buying needs at the time.
Thank you, Layla. That is so important, and we really appreciate that. And thank you for sponsoring that portion of our Wednesday webinar series.
Thank you. Thank you all. Nice to see you again. I look forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, and with that, I'd like to introduce our two guests for today. We have Maria Luisa Boyce, who is very much an expert on global trade. And we have Kat Marran, who is very much an expert on marketing. And those two combined are going to knock your socks off like they did mine. So with that, if you would take it away, Maria. And please tell us both a little bit about yourself as you get started and what you're all about. So thank you.
Sounds good. Actually, this is Kat. I'm going to jump off and then we'll jump in and we'll get Maria Luisa. She is definitely my partner in crime when it comes to webinars these days. We are definitely going on a roadshow and get t-shirts about how many webinars we've done in the last 10 weeks together. But we're very happy to not only be here today with everybody, but we're always happy to be, a partner with Go for the Greens. We've done this for many years, in large part because of Cindy and Diane's charisma and their approach to a business solve that we all believe in. So this mission is really important to UPS. And we're really glad to be a part of that today and share with you what we believe to be some hopeful thoughts, some solutions, and some, maybe go looks for your own business so that you too can not just survive this, but hopefully thrive out of it. Because necessity is the mother of all invention. Well, we modify that to say it's the mother of all innovation. And I do happen to like that it leans on the female side of this. So we're here to talk about how you can turn some of this into an opportunity. With that said, though, the reality is been harsh. It's been tough. We at UPS, with our 495,000 people as well, have had our own concerns and our anxieties about our families and our friends and our UPSers and our customers. And it's been a trying time in many ways. But we have a lot of optimism and we have a lot of confidence that together we will get through this and we may make better things happen because of it. So with that in mind, that's where we want to go today and talk about at least one aspect of that, and that's global trade, because there is an opportunity here if we're mindful of what the changes are. So with Maria Luisa, my partner, who brings 20 years of experience, as you can see, from a myriad of places and trade and international and governmental responsibilities, the two of us really think that we can share some points today. So let's go ahead and move into the next one. At least to share with you what the agenda today will be. Our focus today, because there's so many topics we could talk about when asked, is specifically to talk about some consumer behavior changes that you might already be aware of, but we want to put it in context of how that affects a supply chain and how it affects an e-commerce opportunity at the same time. And so boiling that down into where small businesses can start to take advantage of that if they're prudent about it, that's the objective of today's agenda. So one more, Maria Luisa, and I think at this point, I'm gonna let you start with this and then I'll add to it as needed. And welcome.
Thank you, Kat. Yes, thank you. And thank you so much, Diane and Cindy, for the introduction. I love this crowd. I had the opportunity to go to your event last September and really love the power of women networking. And I love the 4 pillars that Go for the Greens are based off. So today, as Kat mentioned, we're going to be sharing with you how do we see the curve and how do we see the evolution of the COVID-19 pandemic and how that has impacted the customer behavior and also the business behavior. And I think what Kat and I wanted to start in this slide is to share with you, of course, we are ending the beginning of the first half of the right half of this graph that you're looking at it. And we are optimistic and hopeful that the focus will be now for the second half, starting probably within the next month. But we still find ourselves in some of these areas, mainly in the peak season, from peak to down the right. And I think, Kat, one of the areas that you and I wanted to discuss in here was how did consumers reacted, right? First, when they had when the pandemic started, and that reaction was reflected in how they interacted, what they bought, how they changed their behavior and what they did. And so maybe, Kat, I'll pass it to you in terms of taking us through where we are on the peak, and how is that impacting what we're seeing in terms of the rise in e-commerce, right? And that behavior, buying online for safety, not leaving the houses, depending on where the countries were in terms of what the guidance that they were given, and then what type of products were they also buying. And those areas that we're starting to see some recovery, we'll see later how is that trade changing and what we're looking at that. And so Kat, I'll pass it over back to you.
So I'll add to what Maria just kind of laid out there. So this flow that you see is nothing that you probably haven't experienced yourself. And so you may be in different phases right now, and it as different countries and different municipalities are right now, and different companies are. So you could take this particular chart and graph it out by every single industry, and you'd have a slightly different slope perhaps. But by and large, we are seeing, at least from our perspective, and when I say our perspective, it's based on research that we have run every week for the last 8 weeks with approximately 300 to 600 small and medium businesses across the US, and a few that have international businesses as well. And we've been pulsing them every week to say, you know, so what are your challenges? Where are you in terms of having to figure out your business, and what phase are you in terms of recovery? And the good news is most are getting more optimistic. The bad news is, and you'll see some of this a little bit later, is that in the first part of these phases, it was a huge impact. Over 80% of our customers from that survey told us that they had a negative revenue scenario specifically because of COVID. And they were fighting for their lives, quite honestly, in their business lives, while at the same time trying to figure out their family situations and their personal lives and balancing it all, and hard thing to do. So it was about just survival for those first few weeks. But what's odd about humanity, perhaps, and businesses is how quickly businesses have pivoted. And I know we're overusing that word, so let's call it change, let's call it adapt, let's call it innovate, whatever you want to call it. But I'm always impressed by the changes. So we've seen a myriad of companies who had a different product 10 weeks ago than what they have today. And that could be anything from the spirits manufacturer, alcohol that you would have at a tailgate party, to now being a hand sanitizer production, to the pet costume company that now is making robes and gowns for hospitals in New York, to an entertainment support company who does conferences. And with conferences all being canceled, or most of them, not go for the greens, but many of them being canceled, she had to pivot, and she's now making entertainment pieces that are being used in retirement communities to keep them entertained while they're at home. So these pivots are happening right now. And so people are coming down on the other side of this curve, I think. And what stays will be the interesting part. And I can't predict that completely, but what I can say is so far the chain has been good. So you're moving me to the next slide, which is good because it is a psychological effect in many cases. So the buying behaviors that we've seen and that our customers are telling us that their customers are acting upon starts a little bit psychological right now. And part of that was they wanted to feel in control of their actions, consumers in particular. Some businesses as well had to buy in bulk, but mostly consumers were out there buying for control reasons, for preparedness, and to be able to feel like they were doing something to make that right choice. And so at that point, it did create some scarcity in the market perhaps, and that actually made a business opportunity for other people, right? So again, with every negative could be a positive if you're willing to obviously modify your efforts and you have the skill sets and the people to do so. So when the consumers started their actions in these psychological ways, they also started physically changing the way that they're buying. And what that meant is they were at home. Clearly, all of us were home. So people were buying online at a much higher pace. We have seen numbers right now in our shipping world that are at, or to some degree, even above what is normally the peak season of the year, which is in December month. That's extraordinary change right now. What's more extraordinary is beyond UPS, the buying behaviors of consumers we've seen almost triple to their normal e-commerce. So we are taking down years worth of traditional trajectory on e-commerce purchasing, and it's all happening now. So consumers are buying in bulk. They're buying from multiple sources more than they used to. They're doing things in multiple channels as well. And they're finding new opportunities internationally. And that goes in both directions. We've seen a lot of customers tell us that they never knew that people in other countries would want their American-made products, but they do. And that's on the rise, in part because consumers have time at home to go look more. You also have some changes in vendors, good, bad, or ugly. When your choice of supplier can't supply you, you go find somebody else. And now that you stay at home, you've got more time to do that. So these are the opportunities that we think are affecting a small business as much as larger businesses, and those who can adapt to these psychological and channel and international arenas will actually thrive. So Maria Luisa, to the next slide, if you don't mind.
Yep. And so from this perspective, and I'll take over from here, let me put a perspective of the international approach. As Kat is mentioning, we are looking at the changes in behavior, the consumer behavior in the US. We're seeing it also globally, right? On what are the behaviors that we're seeing in the different areas. And so Kat, for this piece on the logistic process, when you look at a company, if many of our participants, you might be a service company, you might be a company that sells, but you have a process in place. Kat, this is an awesome graphic. I love it because I'm very visual, but take us through this logistics process that also can be adapted to some service companies, right? What are we seeing right now in this stage?
So I think that's a good transition. So again, she's right. It's written more from a production of some product movement in logistics, but you could have a process that works for you in a service industry. The crux of this is clearly it starts with something that you create on the left-hand side. In this case, let's talk about that you physically have something that's got to come off a shelf. It's got to be given to somebody else to start its movement. But the smartest way to do it, and especially when you're trying to be a supplier, it makes more sense economically to consolidate those movements, get them onto the most efficient transport scenario that you need, both economically and speed-wise, which is what you see in the middle with the airplane, the truck, and the ocean. And then from an international perspective, clearly there is a custom component to this when duty and taxes play. And then you break those pieces back apart so that they can be delivered to your final consumer or your final buyer. Traditionally, that has been multiple customers kind of in one place because it has been a B2B or a business-to-business move. But that consolidation and then that deconsolidation is happening even more impactfully because there's more smaller packages now going to individual people at home than there were before. Mm-hmm. So why do you care about a process like this? It's because throughout the last 10 weeks or so, there have been gaps in this. And gaps cause fluctuation in your supply chain, which can be troublesome cost-wise, and it can certainly be troublesome from you in a supply perspective. And worst of all, it can be trouble for your customer experience, mm-hmm. Okay? Which at the end of the day, all boils back into your cash flow and your ability to grow. Mm-hmm. So you need to make sure that your logistics process is well understood so that when there are gaps that pop up, you have a way to address them. And we have seen this, we monitor this every single day. This is what we do for a living. So we know where the trade lanes might be moving or not. And Maria's gonna cover that in a minute. But beyond that, we also can advise in the best way to optimize your supply chains so that if gaps happen, there's a quick antidote to it. There's a quick way, sorry, not to use that term in a different sense, but an alternative to use that will help streamline your supply chain, keeping everything moving. And it's not been easy. I told you, we have a lot of employees. We also have a lot of customers. We have a lot of packages, 18 million, give or take, a day that move. And right now, far more than that. And when those gaps happen, you have too many to fall through. So we're quickly trying to close those ourselves, and we have the means to do that. Mm-hmm. But it's not easy. It takes a lot of partners to do that. But it is moving. The good news about the supply chain across the globe is, for the most part, it is working. It's stretched, it is stressed, but it is absolutely working. But if you know your supply chain pieces and you know where your gaps are, it's a much smarter conversation that we can all have.
Thank you, Kat. And maybe that's here I take. So when we talk about capacity and here to the people on participating, this is where we go into our trade nerdiness and our cargo nerdiness. But wanted to share with you that we have seen our global air cargo capacity is 29% lower compared to last year. the good news is that 4 weeks ago, it was almost 39% lower. So we're now seeing more and more capacity as we expand. But let me explain to you why. So a lot of the cargo that is moving around the globe has moved in the bellies of passenger planes. And those passenger planes are not flying as much. So now we have passenger planes that are not flying, so we have less capacity in that way. And then the other challenge that happened is that the famous PPEs that we hear all the time, the personal protective equipment, used to move a lot via ocean. But because of the urgency of the need of the PPE, they started moving into the air. And that took, of course, priority from an air capacity, and that caused more reduction of availability. You might be asking yourself, why is this important for me as a business? Because if you're exporting, you're going to notice that there's not as much flexibility of moving your cargo when you want. The prices are changing. Many companies are having to add charter flights to be able to keep up with the demand, because all that capacity that has been lost is having an impact on that piece. And that causes, of course, delays that maybe from you, that you're used to dealing with your customers, might not be, you were not used to, and now you have to plan ahead, and that's a challenge. Good news is that we are starting to see that the PPE is moving more from the air. We expect it by July and August to start moving back to the ocean, because capacity has been met of PPEs around the globe. That will free up some of the planes, and we'll start having more capacity available. Why does it matter? As Kat was mentioning, in our trade nerdiness and world of trade, for the holiday season and Christmas in December, companies are starting to work on that from June and July. Usually this is the time of the year that we start seeing the work of getting the supplies and the inventory. If there's not that capacity, that is a challenge. And so that's where we have some of the challenges, and you can see this information. But
Hey, Maria,
yes.
Maria, just before you go on, just an additional thought on that. So she's talking obviously to the market capacity. Each airline or each organization has its own. So again, that is one of the things to think about, is how do you better understand what each one of those are doing? Again, I can only speak for UPS, but we certainly provide sourcing information on ups.com regularly that shows you what lanes are moving, what lanes have capacity, and where we're seeing fastest movements, et cetera, to help you better plan.
Yeah,
I think that those are things to be aware of. And especially, as she said, it is changing, if not daily, weekly in this space.
It is fascinating also, because so I'm focusing here on the air piece, but we also move cargo via ocean, rail, and truck. And so we're seeing the full picture on that area. And this gives you maybe a more specific numbers that you can see. In a typical day, 100,000 planes take off. In the current situation, is less than 30,000. And so if you can imagine, that's just a huge change in terms of what we're seeing, but also the tons that are of cargo that are carried. And that's tons as in measurement, not as tons of a lot of cargo that is being moved. And so one of the strategies that we want to leave you behind with this one is to make certain that you are planning ahead. Make certain that if you are selling, if you're exporting, if your business in the exporting, even if you're moving within the country, make certain that you're looking ahead. How are you going to be making the moves, and take into consideration that transportation is being limited. Now, the other part that we wanted to share as we move forward is to take into consideration, and this is valid at the state, local level, federal level, and internationally, is that governments have implemented different policies and transport policies that can impact how goods move around. And Kat was mentioning that goods are still moving, which is the good news. We had the opportunity, I've been partnering also with the International Trade Center in Geneva and doing some presentations to small businesses around the globe and to women-owned businesses around the globe. In some countries, some of the small businesses didn't know that they could still export or move goods. The challenge is to have an understanding of what are the policies locally, so you can understand how to move safely, and continue to move your goods. And so some of these policies have been on, first and foremost, of course, protecting the transport workers. And that for UPS is a big priority, keeping our employees safe. That has been top of the mind, and make certain that we follow all the CDC procedures, the World Health Organization procedures, protecting our pilots as they're moving cargo around the globe, and our truck drivers. And so we are implementing all these processes. And also that first, very important for us, and also it gives peace of mind to our customers to know that we care, and we're also taking care of how we manage that process. The second piece of this is also to make certain that we are communicating with governments at the state level, local level, federal level, and then governments around the globe, on being able to provide what are procedures that make sense, that allow for the goods to continue to move in a safely manner, but not stop completely the access and the movement of goods. And so we're working on how do we keep what we call green lanes for freight movement. And I'm getting too nerdy here on trade and cargo, but we wanted to give you a picture of the breadth of the areas that we're looking at, because in some governments, they're identifying, well, what is an essential good? So now we're seeing more relaxation on that piece, and for them to allow the movement of those goods in a more effective manner, so that you can continue to work with your with your customers. And also, for example, for our friends that are from Canada joining us today, we work very hard with the Canadian government and the US government to make certain that we continue the movement of trade, even though the movement of people has had restrictions, but the movement of trade continue, following safety standards and making certain that we don't impact that business mobility. So things are starting to open up. That's good news that we can share with you. We're seeing it in our network. As Kat mentions, we're seeing the increase of volume. For example, I mentioned earlier, we're seeing Asia open up, almost come back to full production compared to last year. We're starting to see other parts of the world. So something for you to keep in mind as you're looking at the interaction with the customers. So what was the impact on the supply chain? And we did a survey with our UPS Market Research and Consumer Insights, found that they're having impact in the supply chain process. And so, for example, if you're a small business, but you buy some of your raw materials, or you had some of your areas coming from, I don't know, from somewhere that your city might not be in full lockdown, but another location is, that had an impact on your supply chain, or the manufacturing partner shut down. So we wanted to share this information, because some of the lessons learned, and we'll talk more about that later on, is how do business adapt, right? How do they pivot and look at their supply chain and find for alternatives as much as you can, taking into consideration that this too will open up into a new normal, but you will have to have alternatives and make certain that you have a sense of how to manage your supply chain perspective. But enough of the trade nerdiness. Kat, take us on the impact on the small businesses, and please, if you have any questions, don't forget to add them to the chat so we can be able to address them. Kat, okay, back to you.
So we're going to go one more slide, if you don't mind. We're going to go back to a slide that we put up before, which is again the one more for me. Let's just go ahead and move on. There we go. To the adaptation or the adaptation that's happening because of the situation, and what SMBs we've seen do. So again, in the beginning, as everything started to get locked down, the first thing that happened was clear supply chain distribution challenges because international partners are shut down. As we know, Asia shut down faster and earlier. Then you had Europe, and then the US, and now we actually have obviously Latin and South America and Africa. So it's moving around the globe. And our North American partners, again, our Canadian partners had different experiences to some degree as well. So, but by and large, no matter when it happened, at some point SMBs found a struggle with their suppliers in the first place, okay, internationally. Then it started to eke into supply chain distributions in their local. So even if you were locally supplying or locally fulfilling, you then got caught up in that second wave. And then at the same time, you saw a massive hit on digital presence needs. Because as we said, if you couldn't find suppliers someplace else, everybody was seeking new suppliers. So the opportunities actually started to tick up for small businesses, but now they got stuck because they couldn't fulfill. So you get to the top of the hill, so to speak, and that meant a clear reduction in cash flow because you couldn't take advantage of the opportunities and revenues that were in front of you. And you maybe in some cases lost some of your existing customers. And at the same time, you were still paying bills on everything else that was running. So we saw that's the kind of the apex. And I think to some degree, many companies are still there, although there's been lots of support out there through, certainly as the Small Business Administration has tried to cover as much as they can. They're not hitting everything, but they've definitely done as much as they can, I think, to get some relief to our small, medium businesses. You've had other large organizations, mine, but others, who have offered both consultation, pro bono legal work. There's companies who are doing financial advice and support. You've had discounting programs that have been advanced as well. So if you are in that situation at the top of the peak still, don't forget that there are groups that are out there trying to help. There's an organization that's called Stand Up for Small that Amex put together. That's a hub of information for major consortium companies like UPS and many others to get it in one place. So if nothing else, go check out what's there, because there might be some things that you hadn't thought about that could help strengthen you and get you on the other side of this curve, which we are starting to see now. So I mentioned a few examples earlier. We are starting to see some restart activities. Our research that was conducted just last week for that 300 to 500 group SMBs indicated that the numbers have started to show clear signs of economic improvement and progress. We saw that many of the companies who in the past had said that they were closed and impacted, that started to shrink. We saw that, let me get the number right so that I make sure I'm quoting this correctly, that the share of businesses that are open and operating with regular increased capacity rose from 47% 2 weeks ago to 56% this particular week. And 72% are expecting to be open in 30 days. So there is optimism out there, and there is some opportunities to reconfigure your, both your customer base as well as your supplier base right now to take advantage of that. And again, as we get to the very end of this, there may be another pop-up on the other side, but those who get to the new normal with some restructuring perhaps and reconfiguration will, I think, be in a better position for, if there is another wave of this, to not have such a steep curve as we did this past time. I think those are the biggest lessons that we're starting to see. We're starting to see that most companies are still looking to say a full recovery requires an effective and available vaccine for their employees and their workforce, the lifting of non-essential business restrictions, because not all of those are down at this stage, and customer willingness. So at the end of the day, we can all say we're ready to be open, but if you're not ready to buy in person, then you've still got to maintain your e-commerce platform to communicate and to sell. So that new norm is probably not going to ever change. I think people have enjoyed the convenience in some capacities to buy online. And Marie-Louise, I think they're going to stay there for a period of time. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think we're hearing a little bit of that also globally. We are seeing that shift in behavior. And for example, I was in a call earlier today in Latin America where there is not the culture of using credit cards payments or going online. And we're seeing that this is forcing that shift, right, to go more online and e-commerce. And so definitely businesses that had a little bit of digital presence, but not much, more the brick and mortar, are having to have a more robust presence on the e-commerce, because to your point, that behavior change that might continue to linger a little bit longer, right? And the customer experience probably will also change. If you go on the face-to-face, then the social distancing, etc. So I think, thank you, Kat, because this is where we're seeing the impact on the small businesses. And I think in here you were talking a little bit of the numbers, right? And you shared some of the updates.
I think we've hit some of these.
Yep.
So let's go ahead to the next one,
yep,
if you don't mind. I kind of jumped out of order. So one of the other things that we've talked a lot with our customers, hopefully, well, I'm hoping you're not facing all the challenges on this page, but every one of them that has talked to me, at least, has told me they've had at least 2, if not 3 of these areas of concern. And so for me, it was an easier way to put it in these buckets so that we can address it, because otherwise it felt very overwhelming. It felt overwhelming for our customers, for the groups that I work with, and to some degree, even UPS, when we were trying to figure out how do we help solve, or how do we help bring our tools to bear that will be useful instead of just throwing the kitchen sink at all of our customers. So we broke it into these 4 areas based on our customer conversations. One is, again, inventory delays and shortages. That's coming from what we've been talking about today. Are there port challenges right now? Is there capacity constraints? And can you see it? Again, do you have the tools that allow you to at least know what's happening so you even can predict an alternative or pick or choose an alternative? The other group is kind of related to supply chain as well, which is labor and fulfillment. Labor being, again, do you have all your resources available to do the things you now need to do if you have more sales or less sales because of the quarantines? So, or do you have to pay differently? We also know that a lot of small businesses did get benefits to their employees, but to some degree, some of those benefits might be keeping the employees from coming back to work, ironically, which is not the intent, right? So we're in a very interesting space here with our labor on all levels. And the fulfillment disruption, early on in the beginning, a lot of fulfillment was only focused on essential items. Well, if you're in the t-shirt business or you're in a fashion industry or you're not deemed as essential by that, then you got locked out for a period of time. And that was incredibly stressful. It's released itself a little bit, but it still means that there's some backlog and some clogging right now in the fulfillment. That's the downside or the change, but there's a positive change as well. I've seen several companies, I've talked to a few out of Charleston, South Carolina as an example only, who were brick and mortar stores. They're now doing more on e-commerce. They had e-commerce, but they had focused regionally to their e-commerce. Now, because everybody's home, they're getting more orders, not only from the northwestern part of the US, but they're getting orders from Canada and Mexico. And they've now had to solve for a problem during COVID that they didn't plan for, which is positive because it's revenue, but it's a challenge for them. So they're having to think about, do I create a capacity? Do I open up a new warehouse in the northwest of the US? Maybe not, if you can find a different way to fulfill. So all of those pieces are kind of the supply chain on the left side. On the right side, I would categorize as business model changes. Because of the e-commerce shifts that we've talked about a few times already, and because of increased focus on cost savings and a reduced cash flow, that balance of the 2 pieces, the business model that's taking advantage of the opportunities that e-commerce creates, plus the challenges of the supply chain on the left-hand side are converging, if you want to say it that way. And so everything that we've been doing at UPS for a long time, but specifically in the last 10 to 12 weeks, has been trying to get information out to our small customers about how to solve for those as best as we can, or bring the sources that will help them do that. So let's get into that space next, Maria Louisa, if we can. Let's go to the recommendations then.
Yeah. And this one, I just to give a little bit of perspective, and I want to make certain, and by the way, I saw in the chat, hello to Nova Scotia. I still have the gift that I got from Nova Scotia in the meeting in September. Thank you so much. The beautiful, anyway, I can remember the name of scarf. Thank you. Yes, there you go. With the beautiful Nova Scotia colors. Just wanted to take some things into perspective. As we mentioned, what can small business do? What are there are multiple resources, digital resources, but they do impact cash flow. As Kat is mentioning, you need to understand your product, you need to understand your customer, and how are you going to connect with them? And so you have different ways. You have what are called the marketplaces, and you can see there are some of the names of the marketplaces that are available, and those are online channels that allow you to connect with buyers and sellers. This is I think we can say a wave of a lot of people are moving to this wave of marketplaces, makes it easier, etc. You still need to make certain that you have an understanding of what is expected of you and how you're going to communicate in this effort. And never forget, that's because we are in logistics, how do you move that product, right? What is that movement of the product, and how do you manage your inventory if you go to a marketplace? If you're ready to sell 100 of something, make certain that you have the capacity to send that 100. You also have what are the e-commerce platforms, that those give you what we refer sometimes as when you're looking at the ecosystem of e-commerce, making certain that you have a way to pay. How do you receive the payments, give back, if you need to do a refund, be able to understand how do you connect all the behind the scenes in your web page, that you're able to manage your web page, the picture of your product, the payment, etc. It is a management, but they're getting easier and easier. And I think I'm going to throw an advertisement here, because this week, tomorrow, we actually, one of our partners is Shopify. We're having a webinar with them on the small businesses, and we'll send to Diane and Cindy the link. If you guys want to participate and listen, they're going to be given a presentation about how to leverage an e-commerce platform. And this really simplifies your process as a small business owner. I admire you guys being a small business owners, because it is a challenge. Your management, cash flow, the product, innovation, and everything. And so the easier that you can have and simplify your process, the better. And this is one of the areas. And then, of course, you have the shipping and multi-channel, multi-carrier. There are some examples in there, but always looking at how much does it cost to ship your products. And I always laugh when I hear and say, and shipment is free. There's nothing for free. We know that as business owners, the price goes somewhere. And we appreciate that from UPS, because you're in that respect, but make certain that you are doing your assessment and analysis correctly as a small business of how do you leverage this piece. One advantage that small businesses have is that you're more agile. You can change and pivot and adapt. I'm not saying it's not going to be painful, and as Kat mentioned, there are challenges, but you have opportunities to make these changes. And so there are a lot of resources from this respect. And so, Kat, as we move forward into this, when we were looking, we talked about the cost savings, e-commerce. This is our UPS products and what we have available, and what we have implemented, so that you can leverage as a small business and be able to use. Today, because of time, we're not going to focus as much on all the products, but know that you have possibilities. I just want to highlight one that is very important, the two on the fulfillment solutions. We're seeing a shift on that process to about inventory management, or dealing with your customers. If you don't have space to manage the inventory or that communication with your customer, we have a great product that is the UPS e-fulfillment, but that one allows you to have that communication and have a sense of how to manage your inventory, what do you need to send, etc. And that's combined with the where-to-go capacity, because sometimes you don't have the money to pay for a warehouse, to have a big space warehouse. You need just a small space, or etc. Those are the capacities or the tools that you can look at and work out. And because I'm an international also lover in that piece, the worldwide economy is an awesome product too, if you want to send out, keeping your cost low. I'm going to move to the next one, Kat, for time, unless you want to add anything on this slide.
Just one thing. So there's a lot to boil down here. The point of this slide is not to give you every piece that UPS can do, and it's not actually, this slide doesn't even really touch everything that we can do. The key things that I would suggest, 2 actions from this conversation today. If you need some help, go to our virtual consulting on ups.com. You see the link on the slide, or if you put in virtual consulting or knowledge center on ups.com, you can have a 15-minute web chat with somebody, let them know what your challenge is, and they will start to direct you to a proper UPS resource who can start to answer what you might need directly, if you don't already have a salesperson themselves. And then, yes, this is kind of a self-serving pitch of the webinars, one of which Maria Luisa mentioned for tomorrow, which is Shopify. We too have done several. We're on our 7th week as well, Diane. So we're right up there with you guys and trying to get things out that cover these topics in more details. So they're all on ups.com and our webinar page. Grab them, listen to them, ask more questions off of that, and come back and let us know where we can do more.
And then last, we're finishing. Diane and Cindy, I know we have to get to the questions, but what are the lessons? We wanted to leave you behind with some points for you to remember. If you don't remember anything else about the presentation, these are the points that we want you to have. First and foremost, it's very important that you have an action plan. And it's overwhelming. We're going through an overwhelming moment of time right now. And it's important to have the focus in terms of, okay, what will be the steps? Because there will be an opening again, there will be an interaction again. How do you adapt, right? If you're a service company or you're a company that sells, you have to assess how is this new normal going to change, and you have to be adaptive. And so make certain that you have that action plan. The second piece is the restructure of human capital. And this is if you have employees or you are working with other contractors, etc., make certain that you have an assessment of how is that going to work or look moving forward. Be prepared, right, for the changes that are going to need. If you need to do a safety change or something like that, be aware of what are those that need to be done, and make certain that you have it in writing. Right now you might say, Maria Luisa, that doesn't make sense, I have no cash. No, I understand that, but if you have a plan, when things are opening up again, then you are prepared and not overwhelmed on that piece. I think the next one, so we have the, Kat, I was going to throw it back at you, but I remember it's all me in this one, the optimized sales and marketing. And that is very important. We have given you a lot of advice on the marketing mix, the sales channel that you use. Social media has become so important. So much, for example, in my household, I'm not allowed to go into Instagram anymore because I fall for it every time that I go into the different ads that are coming out. But make certain that you have a good channel mix and that you're touching base with your customers. You need to have that constant interaction. This is changing that dynamic. Look also innovative in new white space. And this is how you innovate around the new changes that you have. Do you have to pivot and change what you're doing as a business? Are you able to identify in this adversity, how can you better serve your customers? And so we have some examples of businesses that have made changes, as Kat has mentioned, shifting from making clothes to making masks. The masks might not be longer needed later on, but then how are they looking already? Again, how to shift back into what can they do? So all of these things are very important for you to be aware of. And then be prepared for a recovery. And in this one, I know there's a lot of theories. Is it going to be a V shape, a L shape, a W shape? We have all the economists, all the theories, but one thing that is for certain is we are seeing an increase in the movement of cargo, and as economies are opening, we are seeing a little bit going back to the shopping and the movement of goods. And so you need to be prepared. You need to be ready. Be aware of what is your local policy for movement of cargo so that you can adapt and be able when you can hit the ground running when it's possible. So I'm gonna stop there. And then Diane and Cindy, any questions or Kat, any comments before we move to Q&A?
Let's move to Q&A.
Okay.
Yes, that sounds good. This is Diane, and I'm gonna ask the first question. You guys, can you tell us where's all the toilet paper?
Diane, it's funny that you asked that question.
It's at my sister's house. I don't know what she was thinking, but it's in my sister's house.
I do have an answer, actually, believe it or not. And this was not from a UPS perspective. This is because I happened to attend the presentation. So toilet paper was being made for commercial and personal use. And so what happened is that they had to shift. It's a very 24/7 supply chain process. And because of the impact on workers and who could go to work, they had to shift and make the change on how that was going to be processed. And the commercial was not needed as much as the personal, and that is a different type of quality of paper. So they had to shift and change also the supply chains and how those were produced. I'm not talking about any hoarding of cats and my neighbors that are buying a lot of toilet paper, but that had an impact in the shift of supply chain. And it's a great question because it does give an example of how you don't think about it, but how supply chain gets impacted, right? When the people could not make it. So while they made the change, they also had so many variety of products, they had to choose what type of quality of product to use. So make it only two types available and then start producing to be able to keep up with the supply chain. We won't talk about why toilet paper though, but
we'll all be talking about that for a long time.
Yeah.
So I
That
think
was funny.
right now, Diane, I think you got some of the questions, and then I'm going to wrap up here because it's 2:55 or 2:54. So
One question, and I don't know if it's quick, but I was wondering if what kinds of challenges you're seeing in other parts of the world besides the United States and Canada. Are there small businesses having the same kinds of challenges with supply chain that we are? You know, let's say like in Europe or Asia?
Yes, Diane, we are seeing, I'll go first and maybe Kat can complement on that piece. We are seeing in some parts of the world, for example, in Africa and Latin America, they're being impacted more than in other parts of the world in terms that they were, a lot of small businesses are part of their informal economy. And so because being part of the informal economy, they might not have access to all the support that is given as much from a government perspective, or they don't have the access to information or the networks like a Go for the Greens or a Chamber of Commerce where they can connect and understand how it goes. And so we're seeing that impact. We're working through the foundation and UPS Corporation to make certain that we help reach out to those small businesses. However, to the heart of your question, trade is still moving. The biggest challenge that we see is from rural areas in countries, how to get that transportation to hubs, to cities. And so that's where we're seeing the impact that small businesses are having, one. And the second one, those that are part of the informal economy, had some e-commerce and some digital, but they don't have all the tools available, right, for the payment, etc. And that's where we're seeing an impact in Africa, Latin America. In Asia, they were better prepared. They had better e-commerce tools available because we're seeing the volume coming up. But in Europe, we're starting to see, of course, a little bit of move back, but they were hit hard, of course, by the pandemic in some of the key countries. But even in Italy, that devastation, we still saw some movement of cargo, but it limited to certain cities, right? Kat, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think you covered all that really well. I will pivot because I do see a question that I can kind of relate. So there's a question in here about, you know, if you pivoted a bit and you started to go into a PPE product and you specifically were going from China, you know, how does that impact, or what changes should you be thinking about in the future? So in relation, Diane, to your question, because this has been a global pandemic and it's kind of ebbed and flowed in that chart that I showed in different places, you get different parts of the world who are going through their first slope up, others that are at the top that are trying to figure it out, and others kind of on that down slope. And if we have another one. So I think the key is, no matter what industry you're in, and PPE is a good one to think about right now, it's going to ebb and flow again. Okay, not because I can predict another pandemic, but just because there's a lot of growing surplus on it. So the good news is when opportunity's out there, everybody jumps on it. And then you've got to be the smartest one to figure out when you pivot again. So the biggest thing I would say is you watch any industry and any market around the globe, and you can't predict them all perfectly. If you could, then you'd be a genius, and you may not have to make PPEs because you'd be brilliant in doing other money-making schemes. But the reality is trying to stay as attuned as possible, read everything that you can about the marketplace changes so that you can be the one who takes advantage of the next move. Because when there is this extra surplus, it's going to have to go someplace, which will be good. So you'll find other markets for that, and but you'll be competing against some local who needed to do it because they couldn't.
I think Kat froze.
Yeah.
But yes.
It happens. It happens to the best of us.
I know.
That's right, Cindy. So Maria, we also are looking for, a lot of people have been asking us privately and how to get onto the UPS list to get on the webinars. So
yes, and what I'm gonna do, Diane, is as soon as we're done with this, I'm going to send you the flyer for tomorrow's
Okay.
webinar, and we can send it to the people who register. Thank you so
Okay.
much. And keep in mind, these are tools and information. You don't have to buy anything or do anything, but keep yourself informed. I think, Diane, I was reading to some of the questions. We have found out that small businesses need a lot of technical training. That is something that we are seeing, because they small business owners working and doing what they need in their moment of the production, but now that they find themselves in this world that might change some of the dynamics, that training becomes very important. And so it's not wasted time for you to have that time. So
Okay.
Kat is back.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
And you know
I
what?
don't know what point I got kicked off. I'm sorry. You know, isn't that the life of Zoom though? I
Yeah.
didn't
It
see
is
that
the
happening,
life
so-
of Zoom.
You know what, Kat? If Diane could do that to me every time, it would probably be a better one.
Well, with that, we want to thank you, ladies. I think most of the questions got answered. And
Diane, I forgot something very
Oh, yes.
important, because it's our Canadians and our US friends. We have USMCA coming up July 1st. It starts a new trade agreement between the 3 countries. That's an opportunity for small businesses. There's going to be opportunities to export to Mexico and Canada. And so definitely we talk with Diane and Cindy at the right time. We might do another webinar here just to give you an overview of USMCA and what are the changes, where we're seeing some opportunities, so you guys can have it.
That's awesome. And you know,
Thank you.
just before we close out, just so everybody knows, you know, obviously I have to give a plug to my former employee, UPS.
Because you never do that.
Yeah, no,
Lawyer.
I don't do anything about that. Yeah, you know, hopefully we're going to have Go for the Greens in Disney September 24th and 26th. Like we said earlier on, Laura Lane, who is the president of Global Affairs. If you haven't checked out our website, please check out our website. If everything works out right, Laura will be there, and we would love for you to meet her and love for you to meet the women that were here on the call today. They are extremely professional, and the only thing that they really care about is helping you be more successful. Obviously, this was a free webinar, and right now we just want to make everybody be more positive in the world that right now is so uncertain. So thank you, UPS. Thank you, Diane, for moderating, and we hope that UPS comes back again. Y'all keep doing a great job. And Diane, do you have any closing words that I may have missed on all the questions?
No, I just want to say thank you to all the people who are on the webinar today. It's really important for us all to stay in touch. So we miss you all, and we can't wait to see you again sometime soon, hopefully. All right. And thank you, Maria. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you, guys.
Pleasure.
Thank
Awesome
you.
job.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everybody.
appreciate it.
Good energy to
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Good success.
Take care.